Please welcome Shane Stone to deliver the 2022 Order of Australia Association oration.
National Chairman Major General Barry Nunn, AO, RFD, retired. ACT Chairman Major General Mike Crane, DSC and Bar, AM, retired. Members of the Association, many of you I know, my fellow Australians, good morning. I would particularly like to welcome those members of the National Recovery and Resilience Agency who've come along this morning and joined us, and a special welcome to Sharon Prendergast, MPO, the Director of the Honours Secretariat at Government House. I thank the Association for affording me the opportunity to deliver the oration because it is a distinct honour, and as your past President and a life member, I appreciate it is not lightly extended. When the Premier of Tasmania, Peter Gutwein, announced his retirement after 2 years, he observed he could no longer give 110%. He said he had nothing left in the tank. I understood. Those words resonated with me. 22 years previously, in February 1999, I retired parliamentary politics after 10 years in Cabinet, including near on 4 as Chief Minister, the Northern Territory's head of government. At age 49, I was done. Elected Chief Minister in 1995, in 1997, I had achieved an all-time record for my party, the Country Liberal Party, in winning 18 of the 25 seats, with 57.9% of the two-party preferred votes, the highest in CLP history. Our leaders of political parties these days can only dream about those sort of figures. I lost the referendum on statehood. Exhausted, fed up and largely disillusioned, it was time to go. I had also promised my wife Josephine that my tenure in Parliament would be for a short, not a long time. I was never going to be a career politician. I also understood the reality that it's 7 days between Palm Sunday and the crucifixion. And you do a lot of thinking and reflecting at 49, wondering, well, what's next? I'm now 72 and approaching my twilight years. In the intervening 23 years as in government, it's been a roller coaster ride, complete with ups, downs, successes and failures. Fortunately, I caught the right wave on the homeward run before leaving retirement in 2019 at the request of Prime Minister Morrison to first head the flood recovery in northwest and North Queensland, subsequently take on responsibility for the national drought response, and less than 12 months ago accepted appointment as the inaugural Coordinator General of the National Recovery and Resilience Agency. Up until last year, the Commonwealth did not have a dedicated standalone agency devoted to disaster. That's a lot in a little over 3 years, dating from North Queensland. There have been some consistent chapters in my life's journey. I've not forgotten where I came from. I was set an outstanding example by my parents, Pam and Leah Stone, former mayors of Wodonga. I count as a defining chapter, married 44 years with children, my Catholicism, voluntary unpaid reserve service extending over 43 years, and my lifetime commitment to voluntary community service. Rural Fire Brigade, Children's Television Foundation, Lions, Rotary, Duke of Edinburgh Ward, and Chairman of the Order of Australia. Yes, we are unpaid volunteers. Not an exclusive lift, but it has defined me. For a boy who grew up on a public housing estate, attended state schools and witnessed disadvantage firsthand, I've long understood the importance of the community coming together and filling those gaps that governments can't be expected to do. Governments can't do everything. Today I want to speak to you from the heart about the importance of community service, volunteering and long-term commitment to the communities in which we live. Last week I listened to our Governor-General talk about the way Australians roll up their sleeves to pitch in and help. And there is no better example than the most recent Northern Rivers floods in New South Wales, centred on Lismore. Working in the disaster space, I've witnessed many examples of unsung heroes risking life and limb to help. I applaud the Governor-General and Mrs Hurley on the way they venture into disaster zones, flood, fire and cyclones to offer solace, support and comfort to the survivors. The standout amongst many of you here today is the recipients of the Medal of the Order of Australia, and I don't mean to disparage others at other levels, but you are best described by former Governor-General Peter Cosgrove as the glue that binds our community together. Day in, day out, you turn up and do the hard grind that keeps many community groups viable and ongoing. In this week, celebrating volunteering under the banner Better Together, I have to report to you that numbers of volunteers is in decline. We need to understand why. I'm sure that many of you feel that the world as you knew it has changed. Institutions once revered have been torn down, ridiculed and cancelled. The virus and its aftermath have fractured families, friendships and our general social interaction. The world order is in upheaval, Europe is at war. Some days I struggle to turn on the television. I no longer rely on many media outlets, and any such pretence that print media is a record and chronology of history is fast diminishing. Where are the Les Carolines today? Who to trust, who to believe? But we should not allow this upheaval and realignment of the world that we knew diminish our community commitment. Now more than ever, we must step up. Yes, these are challenging times, but I refuse to be defeated. Now more than ever, our contribution to be the glue, as described by Peter Cosgrove, is as important as ever. In 2010, as your National President, attending in Hobart the biennial conference, Multi-Faith Service, I listened to the address of Sir Guy Green. His chosen topic was We Are Australian, Unity and Australian Values. Sir Guy was well known to me, dating from my time as associate to the late Sir Edward Woodward in the Federal Court. He was one of those Australians who set an example, defined leadership and built an enduring legacy of service that continues to this day. Sir Guy was described in the Age newspaper on the 2nd of May 2003 as Sir Guy, a man of grace and style. Sir Guy's public address life was both quintessential vice-regal representative and an Australian to his bootstraps. The article describes Sir Guy standing ramrod straight in a cold wind for the national anthem and telling people a little more about themselves. This time it was the unveiling at Hobart Cenotaph of the first Australian state memorial dedicated to Victoria Cross winners. Sir Guy has devoted his life serving the public. Described in that same article, on the cusp of his retirement as the Governor of Tasmania, a tall, quietly spoken man with a mixture of aloofness and the common touch, on the record, speaking with depth to many audiences. I was deeply moved by his address. I found myself hanging on every word. In the ensuing 20 years post-Parliament, I've attempted to embrace this idea that when it comes to pass, you'll be judged by your legacy and your reputation. Baubles, awards, wealth and social standing are peripheral to what you leave behind. As far back as 4 BC, the great Greek philosopher Aristotle wrote, "In the arena of human life, the honours and rewards fall to those who show their good qualities. However, it is important to keep all things in perspective." At the turn of the last century, the US author Albert Hubbard wrote, "God will not look you over for medals, degrees or diplomas, but for scars." It's the scars that count. I look back at Sir Guy's address for inspiration and hope to put the arguments for the importance of Australian unity and values. It doesn't follow that yours, my demographic, have a mortgage on what's right. I've had to adjust, recognise that many young Australians view our community through different prisms. The key is that we are all Australians, and for each of us the question remains, what will be my legacy? What will be my reputation? Legacy includes personal conduct and behaviour, ethics, philanthropy, leadership and social engagement. It's not an exclusive list by any means, and your reputation is the sum total of your legacy. Sir Guy referred to the volunteer sector as one of the three components of a great society, alongside a properly functioning public sector and a healthy private sector. Sir Guy said volunteerism makes our community more cohesive, more agreeable and, in short, more civilised. Further, that in Australia the precious asset should count as one of the prime values in which we should be united in recognising and nurturing. I believe we don't encourage, identify, reward or acknowledge our volunteers enough. In 2020, 1/4 of Australians aged 15 years and over participated in unpaid voluntary work through an organisation. This was down from 1/3 the year prior. A 2016 report titled "The State of Volunteering in Australia" revealed that 86% of organisations struggle to get the volunteers they needed. While there are certain pressures impacting people's ability to volunteer, I think there are deeper problems to be challenged in our quest to create a culture disposed to community service and volunteering. I hope it's not too late, but it will take the deliberate effort of every one of us here in this room, among many others. We, people who've been recognised for our service to our professions and our communities, who accept with our honours the responsibility to ensure that there are future generations of Australians deserving of the same recognition. As a council member and thereafter chairman of the Order of Australia Council, I read about these remarkable Australians who demonstrate what we should celebrate, nurture and encourage others to aspire to. These are people who go above and beyond for the greater good of the nation. We get our fair share of brickbats, but the critics and armchair commentators don't see and read what we have access to. The painstaking work of case officers who research in great detail the lives of nominees, as well as the accompanying references submitted by the nominator. We see the whole picture, warts and all. The Order of Australia is not just a pat on the back. It's an acknowledgement that you have made a difference, that you have contributed over and above what might normally be expected of people in your role. You have gone that extra mile. What you have received is special and unique. The Order of Australia is much more concerned with the scars, the nights spent away from family, the weekends volunteering, the foregone income, and the endless hours researching, working and preparing for what you so passionately support. The Order of Australia acknowledges your courage in speaking out for what you believe and your determination to make Australia a better place, regardless of personal cost. You've heard the description, quintessentially Australian. Well, that's all of you. Across the political spectrum, the social divide, the economic gap, you were conferred your honours because you were prepared to work to make a difference, and your country, through the Order of Australia, judged you so and said thank you. But be warned, in the giving and conferring there is a mutual obligation. The award carries responsibilities. It is expected that you will set an example for your fellow Australians, that you will do more and nominate others so that we might celebrate their contribution. By recognising outstanding service and exceptional achievement, we draw attention to the behaviours and values that we hold most dear. By recognising outstanding service and exceptional achievement, we draw attention to those very values. In the words of Sir Guy, patriotism is a lively sense of collective responsibility. We give back so that the lives of all are improved. You can have all the baubles, wealth and social position, but it really matters is the legacy and the reputation that you leave behind. We also work to put right the wrongs we believe are holding our fellow Australians back from being outstanding, exceptional and worthy of the honours that have been bestowed. If I'm asking the question, I'm sure it is also exercising your mind. What kind of world do we live in? In 2011, I spoke at the anniversary dinner marking 50 years of Kiwanis in Australia. At the time, I said there was a recurring theme around the Western world, broken society. I mentioned the two-speed economy that was creating a yawning chasm between the rich and the poor and which fostered a sense of entitlement. More than 10 years later, I'm not sure that much has changed. The pandemic has magnified the best and the worst of people. Fueled by lockdowns and home isolation, social media drew communities together to share information, such as where local supermarkets had toilet paper and meat, and so members could donate excess supplies. They also shared mental health information from official sources or to simply check in for the day. And let's not forget the nurses, doctors, pathology staff, pharmacists, supermarket workers, transport workers, police and paramedics who've been at the coalface of the pandemic for 3 years running. Their above and beyond service deserves to be celebrated. On the other hand, you had people breaching government health directives, knowingly infecting others and in some cases triggering extensive lockdowns, lying on border passes and verbally and physically abusing health, hospitality and retail workers who are only trying to do their job. Choices bring consequences, and just as we're only beginning to understand the long-term health and economic impacts of the virus, I don't think we've yet seen the consequences that such self-centred behaviour will have on our society. As a nation, we run the risk of losing our way. In our new high-tech world, writing a personal letter is not considered cool anymore. We talk and text in hieroglyphics and have by and large lost the art of conversation, debate and public speaking. We check out at the supermarket, interacting with a machine, not with an individual, and we check in at the airport by machine, again, not an individual. We are captives to this new world, which has brought so many constructive benefits and advances, but which tears away at the sense of humanity and self-worth. Our children and grandchildren largely accept that a people-free zone is normal, and I want to say it's not. Add to this the isolation foisted on us by the virus, homeschooling, lockdowns and quarantine, limited travel within Australia until recently, limited overseas travel. A sense of community is driven by people who share, support and respect and value each other. People who sit down and have a meal together. People who talk to each other at the supermarket. People who spend time together in person, celebrating their shared interests. The challenge of our times is to promote and to model and to respect commitment to promoting the welfare of others and a recognition of the essential dignity and intrinsic value of every individual that will foster the sense of community that we so desperately need. Now, before you think that I believe all is lost, I assure you I do not. My aim is to impress upon you the urgency and the importance, now more than ever, of helping society reconnect with ways that unite rather than divide us. Pope Benedict, Francis's predecessor on ascending the papacy, started to speak out on secularism in modern society. He was a lone voice. In the modern world, secularism includes disavowing, that is, putting aside, those fundamental Judeo-Christian principles that hold our community together. Regardless of religious belief and practice, as a community we are grounded in historical religious principles that guide our conduct. Islam, Hindu, Buddhist, Sikh, principles of humanism have likewise added to our moral framework. Whether you live in Adelaide, Sydney, Perth or Darwin, stealing is wrong. You have responsibilities to your family. You should believe in a better society. The common threads that unite us help define the type of community that we live in. As I said before, I think we're starting to lose our way, however, we are not completely lost. As Coordinator General of the National Recovery and Resilience Agency, I see firsthand the positive contribution of volunteers and not-for-profits for survivors of disasters. During the recent floods through Queensland and New South Wales, residents rallied to save their neighbours until the emergency services and the Australian Defence Force arrived. Some would have you think this was uncommon and indicative of sadly lacking emergency response. What worked and what didn't work in New South Wales is the subject of inquiry. And I'm not here to give you my opinion, but I will say this. Digging deep to help our fellow Australians is one of our greatest strengths and most timeless strengths as Australians. In every disaster, we hear stories of people put aside their own suffering as they help others to safety and as they help their communities to clean up and get back to some form of normalcy. A further example is the North Queensland floods in 2019. From 25 January to 14 February, regions of North Queensland experienced exceptional heavy rainfall and major flooding, the result of an active monsoon trough and a slow-moving low-pressure system from the Northern Territory to the Queensland coast. The region hit new rainfall records. Floodwaters up to 700 kilometres long and 70 kilometres wide covered 15,000 square kilometres in the Flinders and Norman River basins. That's greater than the size of the whole of the UK. Some areas, including Townsville, exceeded their average annual rainfall, recording over 2,000 millimetres. The personal toll was immeasurable. People lost livestock and saw sheds and fences they toiled so hard to build wash away. Kids saw their pets perish. People were isolated on properties and some had to be airlifted from rooftops as the floodwaters lapped the eaves. Same again in Lismore years later. And out of this devastation came the unity I previously spoke about. People put aside their own needs to help others. Mayors and elected representatives in North West and North Queensland bandied together to strengthen the regional response, concurrently cleaning up the damage to their own home and businesses. The same occurred again in New South Wales and Queensland more recently. Complementing the response from all levels of government, charities stepped in with supplies, money and muscle. Blaze Aid volunteers assisted a local charity Emerge, Sisters of the North, raised more than $1 million just around their kitchen table, much of which was channelled to vouchers for people to spend in their local businesses in Cloncurry. The National Recovery and Resilience Agency that I'm privileged to lead as Coordinator General brings a national lens in its work with communities on their locally led recovery. Our guiding principle from day one has been locally led, locally understood, locally implemented. This means we bring the lessons learned from supporting communities all around the country, draw on the expertise of some of the country's best and brightest scientists, make evidence-based decisions on where to focus efforts to reduce the impact of future natural disasters, and ask people, what do you believe is needed? We also make sure that needs to be at the table. We have the role of charities play in supporting recovering communities, and we have relationships with charities at every level of the agency. As part of our support for communities affected by drought, we've partnered with Rotary, St Vincent de Paul Society and the Salvation Army, to name a few. Government can't be expected to pay for and do everything. Much like this recent flood crisis across Queensland and New South Wales, the devastation of the 2019-20 Black Summer bushfires across 5 states and the Australian Capital Territory demanded government and non-government to step up in ways that not had been previously witnessed. The collective response presents a compelling case for unified action to care for our families, friends and neighbours who've had the absolute worst thrust upon them. The collective efforts arising from various disasters encapsulate the unified action to move forward and to act. So that is the norm and not the exception. The Australian Government committed $2.9 billion for recovery programs following the bushfires, and the National Recovery and Resilience Agency is charged with making sure the funds are spent where they are most needed. The Australian Red Cross raised $242 million through donations, and that's a pretty impressive collective effort. Both the Red Cross and the Australian Government have been criticised for not distributing the money fast enough. Remember, the fires took place during the second half of 2019 and into 2020. By December 2021, 96% of the funds raised by the Australian Red Cross had already been dispersed or spent. The bulk of the $2.9 billion committed by the Australian Government is being paid or committed. Programs continue to be rolled out. We recently announced the 524 projects totalling $391 million funded under the Black Summer Bushfire Recovery Grants program. It doesn't follow that there are not gaps. Much remains to be done. The vexed challenge of insuring and uninsured survivors is heartbreaking. The slow rebuild, a consequence of unavailability of trades, rising cost of building materials and local regulations around rebuilding. With this most recent devastation, even before floodwaters receded in Queensland, and as the emergency continued to play out in New South Wales, the Morrison government had responded. These rain bomb events, as they were called, smashed much of eastern Australia in late February to March. In many cases, the floods hit fast. In some areas, waters rising quicker and higher than anyone anticipated. And in the case of New South Wales, the floods hit more than once, sometimes up to 3 times in one area. In the events that followed, the Australian Government's response was the fastest in Commonwealth history. Within 24 hours of Queensland and New South Wales activating the disaster recovery funding arrangements, the Australian Government put in place the immediate disaster payments for adults and children. These payments take immediate pressures off families. To date, almost $1.89 billion paid out. And on top of this, through the disaster recovery funding arrangements, the Australian Government has committed more than $3.7 billion, partnering with New South Wales and Queensland governments to support communities to clean up and recover. Across both states, 83 local government areas with a combined population of over 10.7 million Australians have been activated for disaster recovery funding arrangement. It's over 10 million Australians have been hammered by what's been happening out there. Extraordinary number. Over 5,700 homes have been rendered uninhabitable, including over 4,000 which have been destroyed or severely damaged. The Insurance Council of Australia estimates claims will total just over $3.3 billion, with the largest percentage for property damage. These people, our fellow Australians, are top of mind as the National Recovery and Resilience Agency works with the state and local governments and communities, and over many years it will take to recover. You can't fix this stuff overnight. It takes years. Since 2019, North Queensland flood, 160 disasters have been declared in 404 unique local government areas, with a total population of around 21 million. Few Australians have escaped what's been happening out there. That's a lot of disasters since 2019, 160. The scale of what Australians deal with at times beggars belief. People say, what disasters are you in charge of? I said, it's easy to tell you what I'm not in charge of. I'm not in charge of grasshoppers, and I'm not in charge of mice. I got everything else. I said, what about the grasshoppers? Who's in charge of the locusts? I said, I am, because they cross state borders. It's a Commonwealth responsibility. grasshoppers don't swarm. They stay within the confines of their state boundaries. You couldn't make it up, could you? And behind these numbers is the immeasurable hard act mixed with sheer determination of people to press on. Among the first responders to a disaster are trained volunteers for organisations like the State Emergency Service and the Rural Fire Brigades, who work alongside emergency service professionals like police, fire and rescue and paramedics. They are from the community, working for the community, and anyone who's had a home saved by their local volunteers knows how critical they are in an emergency. According to research by Edith Cowan University, 78% of nearly 65,000 responders who helped during the Black Summer bushfires were volunteers. And because of their efforts, Australia's volunteer firefighters featured among the Time magazine's Heroes of 2020. Like other sectors, volunteer firefighting has experienced a decline, and during the 2019-20 bushfire season, the number was at a 10-year low. A Productivity Commission report released in January this year shows that while numbers of paid staff in emergency service organisations have increased, there's been a 5% drop in volunteer firefighters from 2011 to 2021. The Royal Commission into the Natural Disaster Arrangements, commonly referred as the Bushfire Royal Commission, made several recommendations centred on supporting first responders, including volunteer firefighters. While many of these were directed at the states and territories, the Commonwealth also has a role to play and has taken action. That said, volunteering can be expressed in many other ways. As I consider myself a family histories buff, a descendant of a First Fleet convict, I'm immersed in my family story. Queensland Archives newsletter this week highlighted many volunteers who've assisted in digitising property records in the archive service. There are those with service clubs, Meals on Wheels, tuck shop mums, foster parents, and volunteer shop assistants in various opportunity shops. This is not an exclusive list. I spoke earlier about recognising and celebrating achievement through the Australian Honours and Awards system. Both the 2019 North Queensland flood and Black Summer bushfires are recognised as nationally significant events for the National Emergency Medal, which was approved by Her Majesty in 2011. So are tropical cyclones Yazzie and Debbie, the Queensland floods of 2011, and the Victorian bushfires of 2009. The medal recognises the sustained or significant service of both paid and voluntary personnel during these major disasters. Recognising their tremendous efforts is a significant part of assisting these communities to heal. And as I've already stressed, recognising and celebrating selflessness, giving back and offering a hand up to others strengthens a key aspect of the great Australian society of which we are part. Part of this giving back, of course, is mentoring young people. I mean, who are we to despair about the future if we're not prepared to work with and listen to our future leaders? We might not agree with a lot of what young people say, but they're on the way up and we're on the way out. So hopefully we can meet somewhere in between. There are many avenues for this, including the scholarship program offered by the Order of Australia Association Foundation. I want to finish with something for you to ponder as you listen to the conference speakers and over the coming weeks, months and years. I really do believe that nothing matters more than your legacy and the reputation you leave behind. We who have been invested in Order of Australia get this, and it's our duty to encourage and celebrate others to do the same. We often leave conferences with a fresh perspective, renewed enthusiasm and good intentions that last until we return to our everyday life of work, family and personal interests. I can tell you, good intentions alone won't cut it anymore. Action is needed. Don't just say you celebrate service, Celebrate service and do it in the most public way you can. Recognise people who go above and beyond. Talk with passion and enthusiasm about your own work and encourage nominations for people who've demonstrated outstanding service or exceptional achievement, and keep giving back to your community. Finally, I want to take the opportunity to acknowledge the outstanding service of a former chairman and president of the association, Dr. the Honourable Neil Conn, AO, Bailiff Grand Cross of the Order of St John. I had the very special opportunity to have dinner with him on Tuesday evening this week. Many of you will remember him. This will be one of the few association conferences he has missed in decades. And Neil is a great Australian and a man who gave me sound counsel in my public service, and for that I thank him. Every so often someone offers up a point of reflection. We all know about President Kennedy's inauguration. He said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." Henry Ford, the motorcar pioneer, said, "Do more for the whole world than the world does for you. This is success." My challenge to you is, what will be your legacy? And only you can determine that. What will be your legacy? So important, and for that you will be remembered. Thank you again for inviting my participation today. Thank you.